Hello and welcome to Red Light Leisures. Today is part two of my interview with my guest today, Kevin, and we'll be discussing the Equality Act. So thank you for joining, and we'll start right after this.
Welcome to Red Light Leisure Podcast, hosted by your favorite
Las Vegas Chevrolet Lamborghini, former porn star, Christopher Hatton.
Religion. So this was just one example of where, I had contributed to this left mindset of, cancel culture, going after people, and it eventually came for me. Now, another example that I witnessed was, I know this woman, she is an activist locally. I've had many discussions with her, and she's a very vocal activist. She happens to be a woman of color. Her mother is white, her father is black. And it was interesting because she would make so many posts about, white supremacy ingrained into our system in government, obviously systemic racism. She was obviously one of the strongest advocates for BLM, for issues, affecting communities of color. One of the most vocal advocates I've ever seen. And in general, we actually used to get along. Like I said, we could have conversations. But it was interesting because as she moved further left, I saw an interaction where she got attacked. And it's interesting because the way they attacked her was, they said that she had said things that were not supportive of other women of color. And they actually went after the fact that she had a white mother. So she actually got put to this purity test that basically saying she wasn't black enough. Yeah, exactly. So, and mind you, someone watching this, someone listening to this would probably say, well, this is anecdotal. Well, look it up then. Just Google this type of stuff, go to profiles, go to any group, and you will see this. You will see, the problem is, at the end of the day, eventually this mindset, as it goes further and further to the extreme, will become more ridiculous in its focus. And eventually something you say, something you do will trigger this mindset and the mob will come for you. Trust me, it will happen.
Yeah, I believe it. I honestly think, though, that people don't really think that the mob is going to turn on them anytime soon or it's ever going to happen. It's crazy. I feel like it's inevitable, I feel like a lot of this relates back to the whole white privilege discussion. And I feel like as a white man, I have no voice anymore. And I feel like most white men don't have a voice anymore because we've had, apparently the upper hand and everything for so long that it's like our opinions don't matter and they're not valid. So I'm not sure. What do you think?
Certain tools that get thrown at you, regardless of where you come from, regardless of, if you're in a discussion with someone who has a more extreme. Now, I want to first make clear that there are obviously extreme elements on the right as well. Mm-hmm. There are certainly, this exists on the right. There are the purists on the right. So one thing I don't want anyone to ever say to me is, oh, you act like all the extremism exists on the left. No, that's not true. Right. But when in regards to this specific conversation, we are focusing on the left and the results of that extreme mindset. So at the end of the day, though, so I was once, I always joke, and I was like, when I was on the left, I could, if someone told me that they preferred white pizza, so, like the white pizza, that I could basically make them look like Hitler. And I say that jokingly, but I was, at that time, I was very good at twisting words and using that to where I could get someone to get to a point where I'd be like, gotcha. There's your privilege. There's this. So now for me personally, I've had the word privilege thrown at me. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting. Care to continue with our discussion? No, and there will be like, no, I'm like, no, I asked you a question. Would you care to continue with our discussion? Or are you trying to throw, or are you just going to throw more discussion stoppers at me? Yes, I'm white. Yes, I'm male. But where does that restrict my ability to have an opinion on any given subject? It doesn't. Just like nothing about your identity restricts your ability to have an opinion on any subject. To almost to the point where I've actually gotten into discussions with straight people who are more left-leaning. Now, this was interesting because one of the things I really cannot stand is apologies that don't actually mean anything. Is where a straight person had said something about the LGBT community, and I had disagreed with them in regards to what they had said because they were coming from a more left-leaning perspective, and I disagreed with their statement. So they actually, though, they stepped back and they actually apologized. They said, well, I'm not LGBT, so I understand my opinion doesn't matter as much. And I'm like, hold on. I know we disagree here. I know we disagree. But just because you are not LGBT does not mean that you have no right to an opinion on an issue in this world that just happens to impact the LGBT community. Mm. You know, that may affect how serious someone is going to take your opinion, but I don't want you to ever think that you don't have a right to that opinion.
Yeah.
And they proceeded to go on about pretty much what I would refer to as an apology tour, which is another one I've seen where people will apologize to certain demographics. You know, I've had this few interaction where someone posted about apologizing for the homophobia pretty much on the behalf of straight people and on the behalf of Christians, right? And I remember I asked this person, I was like, okay, all right. So my first question is, have you personally, as a straight person, ever done anything vicious or truly hurtful towards someone who's gay? All right. Do you feel that you are homophobic? And like I said, I've had this interaction a few times. Sometimes I'd get the response, no, I don't think I've ever done it. I don't think I've ever done it, but I still want to apologize. I'm like, why? Because at the end of the day, you're apologizing for something you've never done. Therefore, your apology really has no value. And I don't mean to come off, I'm not trying to be rude to you. I'm just saying your apology has no value because you're not the one that did the wrong. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes someone would say, well, you know, I was homophobic in the past, or I had these views. And I was like, okay, so why are you apologizing to me? Because if you feel truly guilty about it, you need to find that person and apologize to them specifically if you targeted someone specifically. However, if you had these views in the past and you honestly in your heart believe that you've evolved and become a better person where you no longer have this hatred in your heart, why are you apologizing for your past, for something that you no longer are? If you have this idea, so this is the thing where I try to get people out of the mindset that they have to apologize for things, first of all, that they've never done, or things that they legitimately have already moved on from. No, you do not owe anything to anyone in a general sense unless you have specifically hurt someone. Then you may owe something to that person.
But then what is this culture of apology? I know a lot of people do it. I personally believe that many people are constantly apologizing because it boils down to just virtue signaling. You know, it comes back to self-glorification. You know, they want to act like they're sorry, but in reality, they really aren't.
Well, that goes back to the basic, to the root pretty much in our childhood, right? All of us as children probably have a memory or an experience where we got caught doing something wrong. So we said sorry, not because we felt bad about it, but because we got caught doing something wrong. Right. So that's or something that was perceived to be wrong by who we were caught by. So I think that's where that comes from. So I believe that most apologies that we hear, especially if we're hearing apologies from politicians, and especially if there's any kind of apology from a corporation, in my mind, I do not sense any sincerity in it, because usually it's timing, it's convenient, or it's forced, or it's after backlash, and that's another thing. With this whole cancel culture, if you go after someone and try to destroy their life and they apologize, how genuine do you think that apology actually is? Just out of curiosity, how genuine do you think that is? Do you honestly think they thought about it deeply and were like, I'm genuinely sorry? Or do you think they're actually probably just apologizing out of fear of having their life ruined? Which, if you're content with that kind of fear mongering, then I say that says more about your character. If you're actually interested in getting an apology out of fear, if you're in favor of fear-driven apologies, that says a lot about who you are as a person, in my opinion.
I really don't think these people just want an apology, though. I think they want, ultimately, control here. They want you to apologize just so they know if they can break you. But ultimately, I think they're out to basically ruin your life.
It is, and well, more than that, it's not just to break them. They want the apology, and they'll pretend forgiveness. But once this individual steps out of line, you know it's going to come back. It's kind of like think of those relationships where one of the spouse always holds on to the anger, right? Even years after the fight, and the one spouse may have apologized. You know, it can be 10 years later, and that spouse will bring that incident back up during another fight to get that, you know, to poke at that guilt, to get that guilt trip going.
Right.
So that's generally, I think, where this comes from. And also, it's interesting because when it comes to the idea of allies, right? So people who are supposed to be supportive of a community. So generally, the idea of allies, whether it was, you know, where people of color are concerned, so whether it was along race or, you know, sexual orientation, the LGBT community, women, generally the idea of allies were people who, out of just who they were as people, their good nature, the content of their character, they said, hey, I support what you're fighting for. And the group would be like, okay, you support us, so come stand with us. Now it's if someone expresses that they want to be an ally and they want to contribute to a specific demographic, whether it be, you know, along, you know, whether it be racially or in regards to sex or sexual orientation or gender identity, generally how this person is treated is the rule goes now, okay, you can be our ally with those quotes, as long as you first do a few things. You first have to acknowledge that you're privileged. That's your first thing you have to acknowledge. Then you have to acknowledge that you are innately bigoted based on your identity. So, for example, if I was a gay leftist still, I would probably say to someone straight who, you know, wanted to be an ally, I'd say, okay, so you first, though, have to acknowledge that on some level you're homophobic. That is the first step to becoming an ally. So it is, as you said earlier, it's like the breaking in of a horse. You have to break someone in, you have to break them down. And so that's basically the approach to allies now is they have to be broken down, they have to admit their sin, and they can be forgiven and then reshaped in the mold that is suited to the narrative. When it used to be, all someone had to say was, I support your cause. And it would be, oh, absolutely, come on in and stand with us. Now it's, no, we need to break you down so we make sure that we have complete control of you. Then you can be our ally.
Yes, and that is very, very unfortunate. So anyway, I really want to say thank you. I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today, enlightening me, informing me, and helping me understand a bit more. And if there's anything else you'd like to say, please go ahead, say it. And if not, we'll say goodbye.
I want to leave this at the end of this on a positive note, because I will admit part of my path politically, coming from the left and then also coming from the right, was there were periods of time on both where my goal was to own the other side. So I would get into back and forth and try to drive the person to say something or do something where I could be like, gotcha. And reflecting back on that now, I'm like, how productive was that actually? So really now what my goal is to have conversations, and I'm willing to have conversations with anyone, whether they be from the left or from the right. If they're willing to have a civil discussion, even if we argue, if they're willing to have an interaction where we can come away from it, even if we don't agree, at least having a respect for the other person's opinion, then that is what's needed this day and age when we are more divided than ever. And at the end of the day, I guess what I want to speak out against are echo chambers. If you find yourself in an environment where all the opinions, all the ideas reflect your own, you are not in a good environment, because you are actually putting yourself in a situation where you would be ill-equipped to survive in a world where not everyone is going to agree with you. So I guess that's my last thing I want to say is down with echo chambers. They are one of the unhealthiest things that we have in this country, whether they exist on the left or on the right. So I guess I'll leave that there.
Honestly, that is so true. I couldn't agree with you more. Down with echo chambers. Anyway, thank you, Kevin. I appreciate you taking the time to join me today, and I will talk to you later.
Welcome, and have a good night.
All right, I'll talk to you later.
Talk to you later.
So I just wanted to say thank you again for joining us today. This was very informative. I really appreciate Kevin taking the time out of his schedule to join me and enlighten me and inform me. So anyway, make sure you tune in next time for another exciting episode of Red Light Leisures. And until then, take care. Bye.